articulating for the last 40 years, 4 decades of struggle. Women have been asking for abolishing of child marriage. Minimum age of marriage should be 18, and women to give their consent, and also equal terms in terms of talaq, and also women to be kind of in terms of MMDA, women are not given alimony. So in Islam, there is mata. So the Muslim women have been articulating for mata as well. Board of Quasi and the Muslim marriage register, women are absent. So women's groups have been articulating women's representation, equal representation, or else affirmative action. The Muslim women, the progressive section of Muslim women, have been questioning the Quasi structure itself because it's very corrupt. It is also, I would say, it is a capture of Sri Lankan politics, Muslim politics and religion, plus elite. The Salim Marsuf's committee took 9 years to come up with its recommendation. The recommendation was also released after huge pressure from the Muslim women. Women went into the street asking for the reform. One interesting recommendation by Justice Salim Marsuf is, apart from women being appointed as Quasi and all, he has said before the recommendation that if at all, if this recommendation does not take place, that the government should give Muslim women an opt-out option so that they can opt out from MMDA, opt into general marriage ordinance.
A very good day and welcome to all of you. We are here today with another episode of GenPodcast with Shreen Saroor to talk about the proposed reforms to Muslim Marriages and Divorce Act. So without further ado, let's delve into the topic. Shreen, from your experience and what you have been seeing throughout the times, what do you think is the main reason and the need as to why we should reform the Muslim Marriages and Divorce Act?
So, Muslim Marriages Divorce Act, which hereafter will refer as MMDA, is a 1951 act. It is a combination of customary practices, religion, and it's a law by the parliament. It has a lot of discriminatory provisions. It directly violates Article 12 of the Constitution. Some of it are women cannot be Quasi, part of the system, Quasi system. Women cannot sign their marriage certificate. There is unilateral talaq. There is discriminatory provision when it comes to talaq, divorce procedure, men and women. It also allows child marriage, and there is unconditional polygamy, and the marriage registration is not mandatory. So in that context, the Sri Lankan women, particularly Muslim women and children, are denied their fundamental rights. So therefore, this law needs reform.
Yes, very much so. So are there any specific demands from the community, the women and the Muslim community, in reforming this act?
So substantive law, women's groups have been articulating for the last 40 years, 4 decades of struggle. Women have been asking for abolishing of child marriage. Minimum age of marriage should be 18, and women to give their consent, and also equal terms in terms of talaq, and also women to be kind of in terms of MMDA, women are not given alimony. So in Islam, there is mata. So the Muslim women have been articulating for mata as well. And also in the Quasi system, and also Board of Quasi and the Muslim marriage register, women are absent. So women's groups have been articulating women's representation, equal representation, or else affirmative action, so that women in numbers can be appointed. We have about 65 Quazis in Sri Lanka, and women's equal representation is something that women have been demanding. And most importantly, the women's groups have been also articulating that strict interpretation of Quran and the way that the MMDA has been restricted with the interpretation of Safi school of thought. The women's have been asking progressive reform in the context of looking at other schools of thoughts as well.
Yes. Shreen, you were mentioning that this movement actually has its origin 40 years ago. So would you like to elaborate a little more on that? What was the origin point of this movement? And since the act was enacted in 1951, so it has been about 70 odd years since it was enacted. So what was the origin point, and what were the tipping reasons for this the cry for the amendments to take place?
So the women's movement, even in Sri Lanka, the progressive reforms to various other law also started in late 80s and 90s. That was the time the Muslim women also started looking at this law, particularly Muslim Women Research Action Forum. My senior colleagues like Jessima Ismail and Anbaria Hanifa and all of these women have been also part of various international processes, including Beijing Platform of Action, and also like we have been, and CEDAW and all these processes as well. So in that context, Muslim women also started looking at this very repressive law and started articulating within the Muslim community of women's rights, particularly abolishing child marriage, forced marriage, teenage pregnancies have been the main reason why they started talking about these issues.
Yes.
Early stage.
Yes. So you were discussing about the shortfalls of the quasi system and how it does not accommodate women, and in fact it's a very flawed system. Are there any special things that you would like to highlight with regard to the quasi system? What are your thoughts on it?
So the quasi system is it's in the MMDA it says a male with good character, so it doesn't call for any qualification. Also, it's direct violation. There is direct discrimination against women in this particular act. Early stage also the Muslim Women's Research Action Forum, when they started working, they also looked at other Islamic countries where women have been given this position, and they started articulating why women should be part of this structure. Because mostly this structure is very oppressive to women, particularly polygamous marriages and marriage not being registered. Women were finding it very difficult to get the children's birth certificate and proper compensation. There has been quite a lot of violence against women. So that was also one reason why they started looking at it. So the Qazi system, the women have been articulating for a very long time that it should have equal representation of women. But at this more recently, the Muslim women, the progressive section of Muslim women have been questioning the Qazi structure itself because it's very corrupt. It is also, I would say, it is a capture of Sri Lankan politics, Muslim politics and religion, plus elite. It works for certain section of the people, not for the poor people. There is corruption, sexual bribery, and women have not been treated well. I mean, they can't even speak at these Qazi in front of Qazis, right? So in that context, Muslim women now have been articulating for family court, which is also in it's not in a kind of a practically it's not there, but the family court system has been in conversation in the legal reform processes. So what we have been envisioning is a family court structure, not only for the Muslim women, but also for other women, so that women's personal issues, children's private issues can be handled amicably in a private, very women-friendly atmosphere or family, child-friendly atmosphere. That has been the articulation right now.
Yes. So also there's one of the main highlights with regard to the trajectory of MMDA reforms has been a promise of the previous, very recent Justice Minister in enacting the reforms or incorporating the reforms recommended by several commissions that was in operation over the years. So what are these reform committees and commissions, and what sort of a role did they play and if there are any key recommendations that you think is should be highlighted, could you tell us a little bit more?
So these reform committees are very interesting. We have had 5 committees. There is an ongoing 6th committee, expert committee, that was initiated by former Justice Minister Ali Sabri, and that is being continued with Vijayadasa Rajapaksa, Justice Minister. This particular committee has been not only put for the MMDA reform, but in the post-Easter bombing context, the holistic reform of the Muslim community. So this particular reform committee has given its recommendation, and it's very progressive, and there are 2 female members in this reform committee, and they have asked for polygamous marriage to be abolished. There are Muslim countries like Tunisia, Turkey, where they have abolished polygamy. We are also talking about Quasi systems to be lifted up to district court level as conciliatory body, so that if there is conditional polygamy, the district court might be able to look at the eligibility of the man, and the woman gets proper compensation, property wise, and all those things. So there is that discussion. The previous committees, we had Dr. Shahabdin's committee, and also Mr. Farooq's committee, and thereafter Muslim Women Research Action Forum initiated its own committee. There was another committee which is not named. And then we also had Justice Salim Marsuf's committee. Very interestingly, Justice Salim Marsuf's committee took 9 years to come up with its recommendation. The recommendation was also released after huge pressure from the Muslim women. Women went into the street asking for the reform. The delay was mainly because they couldn't find unanimous recommendation. Thus, Justice Salim Marsuf's committee gave 2 sets of recommendation. So one set was much more progressive, that is led by Justice Salim Marsuf. The other one, led by Faiz Mustafa and Al-Silon Jamiatul Ulama, was very, very conservative. Basically, it didn't address the grievances of women and children of the community. One interesting recommendation by Justice Salim Marsuf is, apart from women being appointed as Quasi and all, he has said before the recommendation that if at all, if this recommendation does not take place, that the government should give Muslim women an opt-out option, so that they can opt out from MMDA, opt into general marriage ordinance, because currently the Sri Lanka's general marriage and registration ordinance blocked 2 Sri Lankan Muslims getting married under general marriage ordinance. So his recommendation was, if the Muslim community is not ready to give women equal rights, then they should consider giving them the option. That was very, very positive for many of us, because we know that this back and forth, the last 40 years of not having reform, every time the reform reports comes out, and our MPs in Parliament comes collectively to block it with the help of the Al-Silon Jamiatul Ulama. So therefore, many of us feel, the younger generation, that at least we should be allowed a choice. That should come from the state.
Yes, so that's very interesting dynamics. Would you also tell us a little bit more about how the community really feel about these reforms, and what is the sort of response that the Muslim community has for these reforms, and the split sets of reforms, if so?
So there is back and forth with regard to the community. The victim communities, particularly women and younger women, women who have been abused by this or underwent abuse because of this law, are very particular that this law should be reformed. None of us are articulating that this law should go. We are all saying this law should be reformed in par with the fundamental rights chapter of the constitution of this country, right? So therefore, I mean, lots of victims that we have been interacting with have been of the view that MMDA should be fully reformed, and women and children should be given equal status. Child marriage should be abolished completely, and all children in Sri Lanka should enjoy freedom of education, and so therefore one section of the children who are belonging to certain religion has been deprived, right? So that's how they see it. But there is a sharp split when it comes to men, because if you carefully look at it, in Sri Lanka, the Muslim men are in a very privileged situation. They can marry any number of women without any condition. They don't have to pay alimony. They don't have to pay much maintenance. The maintenance are mostly decided by Quasi. You can get bribe Quasi and get the money that you wanted to give, and it doesn't bind the men with their family duties, right? So it's very interesting that the men in my community has been very supportive of this oppressive law without understanding what it can do to their own women folks and women children. And it's extremely difficult because some of the educated people and the way that they talk about that, we child marriage is very minimum in Muslim community anyhow. Even if one child marriage is a problem, and they say polygamous marriage is not widespread, but if men are not taking care of their women, and if they are not paying proper maintenance to their wife and children, it is the community that is going to suffer. So this particular law is actually dragging the community's um, progress downward. And how much we tell, I think mostly Muslim men are against giving up their privileges. So that's always the case when a certain section is enjoying privilege. When you take away that privilege, there is always resistance. That's what is happening with regard to MMDA.
I would like to pick something up, something very interesting that you were mentioning as earlier about state responsibility. So one might think that this is Muslim Marriages and Divorce Act and it does not apply to the general population of Sri Lanka. And one might also think that why should the general public be aware and involved in this discussion? So I think we should explore a little bit more about why the state is responsible and how the public can pressure the government and the state to being more proactive towards these reforms. So what do you think about the state, the role of the state in these reforms, as well as the role of the public?
So say, I mean, this law actually was brought in by Parliament, right? And it directly violates fundamental rights chapter of the Constitution. All the parliamentarians, they know that, right? So whether it's a Muslim parliamentarian or other community parliamentarian, it's their responsibility to uphold the Constitution, and therefore this law needs reform. The other thing is the state is also responsible because the women, Muslim women, particularly young women, are boxed because they can't get married without wali, right? Without the guardian, right? So they are being treated like minor. Most of the cases, when women want to marry on their own, they can't. Even if they're 30 years old, somebody has to give them in marriage. It's highly problematic, right? And so in that context, the government should give those women option to marry under general marriage ordinance. Because I have dealt with many cases where women undergo abuse at home, young women, and they escape abuse, and then they're outside the home, and they find a partner, Muslim, wanted to marry, and they can't marry without the father coming in and giving the consent, father or brother. So oftentimes these women are treated like minor children, right? So the government knows this, right? So that's, I mean, if you take the Sri Lankan marriage certificate, other community marriage certificate, Muslim community marriage certificate, the bride doesn't have a space to sign, whereas other community they have. So we are treated like very secondary citizens. The other thing is, um, I mean, time and time again, we have brought in lots of issues with regard to Quasi structure, and the Judicial Service Commission, which does the administration, has turned blind eye to the complaints that we have made, particularly bribery, sexual bribery, and all those things. And like one thing that the government should understand is all these 65 Qazis Qazis are run by taxpayers' money. It is not the Muslims only who are paying tax for the Qazi system. It is everybody's taxpayers' money. So it's the government responsibility to make sure that these structures and the law should be reformed because it goes against constitution. It also the government structure, whether we like it or not, government is running a parallel legal system for the Muslim community that is oppressing the Muslim women and children.
Yes, that's actually very powerful. That's a very powerful message to take to the general public to look to reflect on as to why these discussions need to be more in the public space and discussed widely among everyone. So with that, I would also like to ask you, now we were discussing why that Muslim law is essentially operating as a parallel legal system in on par with the general law in Sri Lanka, as well as the fact that this law is unique and that it needs to be preserved. So, what do you think should be done in few key points to preserve the uniqueness of Muslim law in Sri Lanka, as well as eliminate the discriminative elements on it?
So, number one, even though it goes as parallel, after certain stage, we also appeal to the appeal process. Say, you have Qazi system, then if Qazi makes a mistake, you go to Board of Qazi, which is also male only male, where their lawyers can appear. Then you go to appeal court. Whereas other community, it is magistrate court, and then they go direct to appeal process, right? So the Muslim women have three hurdles in order to go to the appeal process. And then the other thing with regard to, so that's a huge disadvantage. People say it's good, but I see it as usually in Sri Lanka, justice itself is a very delayed process, right? So anybody who wants the appeal process, they have to jump, Muslim women have to jump um, one more ladder in order to go to the appeal process, which this Board of Qazi is also expensive process because we have only two Board of Qazi courts. One is in Colombo, the other one is in Kalmone. Right? So it's traveling and all these things are very expensive. What are the good things about MMDA? Okay, so MMDA is somehow like the Qazi structure has it has somehow made it a point. It looks like a family court, but there's a lot of injustices committed. So that's why we are articulating for a family court system, like a system where there is kind of a privacy is maintained in some form. Because we have been to magistrate court, also district court with regard to various issues, and we see women and children struggling in open court with regard to their issues and things like that. So we have been talking about uh, in the legal system, uh, there should be privacy, right? When it comes to incest and also domestic violence, family related issues and all. It gives state an opportunity to look at the current court structure and reform that structure. The second thing about this whole MMDA and the Qazi system is that in the MMDA, there is a divorce called Mubarak divorce, which the husband and wife, if they consent, they want a divorce, they can just go separate ways. But in Sri Lanka, other divorce under general marriage ordinance, it is fault basis. You have to find fault with each other. You can't just separate and go on your own way. So there are some good things and bad things also. So what lots of women lawyers and the activist community has been asking is look at both and give us a court where women's dignity is respected and we settle things amicably. We don't have to be insulted, feel intimidated in a space where we need to talk about our issues.
Yes. Shreen, finally, is there a particular message that you want to give or key things that you want to highlight and mention as a final concluding remark?
So the Muslim Marriage and Divorce Act has been the Muslim women's struggle all this time. I wonder why. Because I have seen oftentimes it is a topic everybody says very sensitive, we can't touch this and all those things. In a way, in the context of anti-Muslim rhetoric, anybody outside the Muslim community talking about this issue also being framed as that. But what we are asking is not one country, one law. What we are asking is reform to this oppressive law. So we have been reforming various other laws also in this country. So in that context, it is very important. Other community, men and women who are working on law reforms and discrimination against anybody should join hand with us. The other thing is it's also state responsibility. So people who are questioning state with regard to their responsibility, it's a must that they join hand with us. And also one more thing about the Muslim personal law in Sri Lanka, it is bringing the Muslim women and children further down. Their education is disrupted. Children are not looked after very well. So in the current context with economic crisis and all, it's extremely difficult for the women to look after their children. So if a portion of the women and children coming down means the entire Sri Lankan progress with regard to women and children will suffer. So therefore, it's a must that everybody should contribute to this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Shreen. I think this discussion left us with a lot of points of reflection to think on it and think on ourselves and our contributions towards the struggle of reforming the MMDA. So I think with that, we can wrap up the discussion and meet with you all on another episode like this. Thank you.